Welcome to Plot Twist Radio, the show where creativity, storytelling, and the unpredictable path of the creative life all collide. I'm your host, Erin Egnatz. Welcome back to Plot Twist Radio, the show where every life has a story, and sometimes that story spans rockets, television history, wilderness expeditions, and the human heart. Today's guest proves that reality can be far stranger and far more inspiring than fiction itself. Chester L. Richards is an engineering physicist, inventor, space program contributor, and author whose lifetime stretches from memories of World War II to the modern space age. Along the way, he worked alongside pioneers connected to the Apollo missions, helped guide rocket technology, collaborated on Star Trek, and later turned his extraordinary experiences into memoirs that explore adventure, grief, resilience, and what it truly means to live. We talk about science fiction becoming reality, the human chain of history, why writing can heal, and why, even in your 80s, it's never too late to become something new. So whether you love space, storytelling, or simply hearing from someone who has witnessed nearly a century of change, this conversation is for you. Let's step into the timeline. Hello and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Well, I'm a retired old guy, and my profession was, I guess you could say I was an engineering physicist because I was half of an engineer and half a physicist. I have education in both areas. And then I guess I'm a writer because I've now got published books. And I've just had a really interesting life. I'm in my mid-80s now. And my memories go all the way back into World War II. So I've covered a great deal of history in the course of a very long lifetime. And I've done a lot of very interesting things, been involved with the Star Trek, of course, and then had a number of wilderness adventures ranging from Alaska all the way to Africa. And of course, I've been in a most interesting profession because I've been involved with putting stuff in space and rockets and radars and all kinds of other interesting things. And I have a bunch of patents, so I'm qualified as an inventor as well.
That is incredible. My youngest son is obsessed with all things space. He asks questions all the time, and I'm like, I don't know. I don't know the answers to it. So I told him today I would be interviewing a rocket scientist, and he was just, his eyes lit up like,
Well, I hope he
cool.
enjoys the interview because, yeah, I have to tell you about rocket science. Basically, a rocket scientist is anybody doing modern engineering. So that's kind of the broadest definition. I've actually been involved with rockets, primarily involved with looking at the guidance of various kinds of rockets and missiles. But I've also worked with some of the guys that put us on the moon. And those are the real rocket scientists. Those are the guys I look up to and say, oh my God, I've had the privilege of sitting side by side and learning from these guys and having them as my friends, So it's just been an extraordinary achievement to be able to get to know the people who actually put us on the moon. Yeah. So I'm a rocket scientist in a secondary sense of having lots of friends that have actually been historically important individuals.
That's quite a journey, and you must be extremely proud. I know I would be.
Well, these are really interesting people, and they're fun to be with, and you just learn a lot. Let me tell you about one of those guys. His name was Tom Coltis, and he became one of my gurus for a number of years. He taught me about rocket engines, taught me about jet engines, that's totally different from the kind of education that I had had. In the Apollo program, Tom was basically one of the masterminds behind building the rocket engines for the Saturn rockets that took us to the moon. He also worked on the engines for the moon lander as well. And then later on, he was the master for the engines for the space shuttle. So he basically was the architect of the space shuttle engines. So there was a problem with the Apollo 16 flight, which was the last unmanned flight, but it was the first flight that had the full loads, weight loads that were required for the rocket. And what they found when they flew that rocket is that it almost certainly would have killed the astronauts if they had flown the Apollo 17 rocket. So this is like 19 probably 1968, and the Apollo program was dead in the water. There's no way they were gonna fly the moon rockets because it would kill the astronauts. Tom looked at that problem, and he found the solution to the problem. So they rebuilt the first stage of the Saturn rocket according to Tom's prescription and solved the problem so that the astronauts could get safely to the moon. So Tom Coltis, my friend, is an honest to God American hero. He's the guy who actually got us to the moon when the emergency happened.
That's incredible.
Yeah, that's the kind of people that I've had the privilege of working with over the years, and there've been a number of these guys at a very, very exalted status in terms of their accomplishment in the world, and it's just been fun working with them, it really has.
Could see, I mean, to me, it it seems almost like a fantasy because, I grew up one of my favorite movies growing up was October Sky. I loved everything about the space program, but I just could
Yeah,
not figure out how to do it. I'm a historian, so I do that, but science was always interesting to me. I
but this is a terrific period for a historian. You basically could be Thucydides in this period
Oh,
because
yeah.
it's just as critical a period as what he went through.
Yes. Yes, and I see a lot of parallels, because that's just how my mind works, like,
Yeah.
some of it's not so fun, but, that's
Oh, it's
life.
a really good time to be alive if you're a historian.
Absolutely. Hopefully, I'll have some good writings, some academic writings, but we'll see. We'll see what
Yeah.
happens there. So, at what point did you realize that the stories behind the science were just as powerful as the science itself?
My background is I grew up reading science fiction, and I was privileged to be in junior high school and high school during the golden age of science fiction, which was the 1950s. And I had an arrangement with the regional library where I got first dibs on every science fiction book that came through the door. I got to read those and do a book review for the head librarian. So I literally devoured everything that was published from 1951 to 1960, somewhere in that period of time. And of course, obviously, I was going to do that as a profession. I was going to get involved with that. So I studied physics as an undergraduate and both physics and engineering as a graduate student as well. Let me say this. When you look at the world from the perspective of a kid in the 1950s, the year 2025 is a far distant future. It's a
Mm.
science fiction world, okay? And, I'm living in a science fiction world, having done a science fiction career. I've been, I guess you could say, a hero in a science fiction story in working with rockets and things of that sort. Um, and I look at people like you're a person of the future from my perspective, and so is your son. These are people of the future that I have to deal with on a daily basis, and that's pretty amazing because 'cause you're gonna see all the way to the end of this century and gonna see many, many more miracles to come.
Oh, it's so cool to think about how many people, like when I was a child, I was able to meet Victorians who were in the middle, who got to see such
Yeah.
progress. And then, there's like my grandparents and, they got to see a lot of progress just like you. And now, I'm getting to see it's so cool. I love how it
Well, I
intersects.
agree with that chain of history because when I was young, I met people I met a woman who was born in this during the Civil War. So that's how far back my chain of connections go. It's and I worked with a guy, his name was Gunnar Egenquist, who worked in the aviation industry. It wasn't aerospace in those days, it was in the aviation industry. He started working in 1915, and he's one of the pioneers. He knew all the guys. He knew Bill Boeing and the Lockheed brothers and Jack Northrop and all those guys. They were young engineers working alongside him. So I have that experience of working with somebody who was a pioneer in the aviation in the world of aviation all the way back in 1915. So, there is a human chain that goes at least through me, and it goes all the way back to the Civil War. And it's like history. It's in the books, but, it's also living people as far as I'm concerned. These are real people.
Absolutely. So, tell us about your memoir that you have. Is it coming out or has it just came out?
Actually, 2 books have come out. One is The Potato From the Potato to Star Trek and Beyond, and then the second book is The Trek Continues. And I have a third one that's written, but it needs to be edited, and it'll be out in a year or 2. Basically, the way I got started on the writing the books is that my wife passed away. This was 20 years ago that she passed away now. Anybody who's had this kind of experience understands, I was absolutely devastated, and it took me a long time to get over the shock of it because she literally died right in my arms. Her heart stopped literally right in front of me. And what I found was when I was working on the memorial for her, for the memorial mass, I found that just writing that document really lifted my spirits significantly because I could talk about her and I could talk about her triumphs and tribulations and things of that. And my wife was a most extraordinarily interesting individual, by the way. We can talk about her a little bit, but my dear Sarah was one of these extraordinarily gifted individuals that you run into once in a while, and I had the privilege of living with her for 20 years. So I was doubly devastated, both in the shock and also the fact that I was losing my life companion. But I found that writing helped, so I started writing some of the stories that she was familiar with, but I had never written down. You know, some of the adventures that I'd been on. And what I found was every time I wrote a new story and I wrote it as thinking of her and basically telling the story to her as I was writing, it lifted my spirits. And I basically walked a stairway up to recovery through the stories that I wrote. And I've talked to other people that have had similar experiences and they find ways of recovering by doing something productive, something that drags them up from the depths because the depths are really pretty damn hard. You know, it's the best description of hell that you could possibly have. So I eventually recovered. You know, it's not the world isn't the same, and her spirit is with me. Her spirit is in everything that I write. I write everything about her and to her when I'm writing a story. But I've had a lot of good experiences and a lot of good stories to write. You know, it's just I have fun writing. I really do. It's a pleasure now.
That's how I feel too. And I haven't experienced the grief that you have, but in other aspects of my life, I've noticed, writing can be therapeutic. Even though I write fiction, it's still
Yeah.
therapeutic, to escape the world a little bit and, put the words out there. So I
Well,
understand.
that's an interesting thing because, my perspective is when you write fiction, and I've tried my hand at it a couple of times, as you're probably aware, you're really writing about yourself. You're writing about your own experiences and what you see in observing other people, but you're projecting that into a different world, whether it's a fantasy or science fiction or a historical period. That's an interesting point, by the way. When I was reading science fiction, I didn't realize what I was reading. I was really reading history, but being that history and historical events being projected into a different world, into a science fiction, different planets but basically they're talking about how people interact. The writers got their ideas by reading history. So, you know, whether you're talking about a historical novel or a science fiction novel, you're really talking about the same thing. You're talking about projecting what you've learned about the world into a different environment.
Yes. So tell us a little bit about Star Trek because while my one son loves space, my other loves Star Trek, Star Wars, all that.
Yeah. Well, so I was a graduate student and I friends among the undergraduates. One of my friends, Judy Burns, had recently graduated, and she was really intrigued with Star Trek. And I didn't even own a television when all of this got started. I had to buy a television so I could watch the moon landing. But Judy was really interested in Star Trek. She was an anthropologist, by the way, and a star student as an anthropologist. And she had this infatuation that she had developed for Leonard Nimoy. Judy was a schemer, and so her idea was to get to know Leonard Nimoy somehow And she figured the only way she could do that was to write a script for Star Trek and get it accepted. So she did that, and that was in the 2nd season, but the 2nd season was the original Star Trek was canceled after the 2nd season. So Judy worked with a bunch of people to help get the show back on the air, which was remarkable because that had never been done before. But they did get the show back on the air for the 3rd season. And in the meantime, Judy got me acquainted with Star Trek by sitting me down and showing me a bunch of videotapes of various shows. So I had this picture in my head of the Enterprise and the bridge and all the characters and everything. I went to sleep one night, um, and I had a dream that I was on the bridge of the Enterprise, and there was a ghost haunting the bridge, and everybody was scared to death, and that was a wonderful dream. It woke me up. I wasn't scared. I was just observing what was going on. I woke up and I made some notes and I says, I got to talk to Judy about this in the morning. And I went back to sleep. And I called Judy in the morning and I says, I had this dream. And she says, that's a wonderful idea. Let's collaborate and do a script together. So that's how I got involved. So there's a lot to the story, which I tell in the first book, From Star Trek to Beyond. But basically what happened was Judy had connections that got us in to see the producers of Star Trek, and got him to actually read the script and got us through the door to have a meeting with the producers of Star Trek, which was, a very interesting experience. Basically, they said in the meeting that they loved the script. They're gonna buy the script, they're gonna produce the show, but they need some rewrites, minor rewrites. And when they told us what was required in the rewrites, it absolutely blew the story completely to smithereens. And then they gave us a week to do a completed script, do all the rewrites and get a new script in, which we succeeded in doing. But boy, I'll tell you, that was one panicky week.
But I can imagine the pressure was on there.
Yeah, it was. Anyway, I tell the story in detail in the first book, and it is a fun story. It really is. There's really interesting characters that we ran into when we had the producers meeting, and the hard work that we had to go through to invent basically a whole new story with some of the original elements. But they accepted the rewrite, the new script that we did, and with modifications, it went on the air, and it did very well. I had called out some special effects that ultimately won an Emmy Award for special effects for that particular episode.
Wow.
And the script was in a featured exhibition at the Smithsonian Institute. So there were
Incredible.
a lot of kudos that came from that experience. And I said to myself, well, okay, I'm not a writer, but this was fun. And I put aside the idea of writing for, I really didn't think of myself as a writer. By that time, I was an engineering student and graduate student. And that's that was my career. But as it turned out, I ended up being a writer. And what happened was in my various adventures, I did a lot of river traveling and I kept a journal. And people started asking, what are you writing? So around the campfire, I started reading what I was writing in the day's events. And people thought they were really good stories. So I just found out by reading my journal around the campfire that I was in fact a storyteller. It rather surprised me. I didn't expect that. You have to understand, when I started as an undergraduate, I I flunked subject A. Um, I had to take bonehead English because I didn't know where to put a period or a comma in a sentence. I had no idea what sentence construction was all about. I had skipped all of that going through, elementary school and things, and I faked it through high school.
Right.
So so I actually learned how to construct a sentence when I was an undergraduate taking a bonehead English course. So the whole idea of becoming a writer and actually selling books, I mean, there's no way in the world I would have conceived such a thing.
Right. I'm right there with you because when I first realized, I guess, that I was a storyteller, I was much older.
Yeah.
So, when you look at your life now, what feels like the greatest adventure? Is it space, storytelling, love? What would you say?
Well, love is the greatest adventure, obviously. I'm an analytical type, so I have to define what an adventure is. So let me define adventure. Adventure is anything you do for the first time.
Mm,
If you keep doing the same thing, it's either a drudge or it's something that you're doing because you like doing it. But that's no longer an adventure because it's a repetitive process. It can be a love, but it's not an adventure. So it's when you do something brand new, get a new job, having to meet all kinds of new people and get involved with a new situation. Getting married is a great adventure, of course. Having children is a great adventure. Everybody has these during the course of your life. It's inevitable, but it's how you look at those transitions when they happen as to whether or not you look at them as an adventure or just another getting on with life kind of stuff. So I tend to look at all these new things that happen, and some of them have been dreadfully bad things, by the way. I look back at them as useful adventures that I learned from and grew from having had that experience, so that I'm a richer person from having had the experience, even though the experience could have been very painful. I've had a near fatal heart attack, for example, and I've written about that in the third book, as a matter of fact. What it's like to go through that process. And there have been other really horrible things that have happened. I've been fired from jobs. I mean, it's just things that happen during the course of a lifetime. And I grew from each one of them because I looked at each one of them in retrospect as an adventure, as something that was enriching me and increasing my understanding of the world.
that's an excellent answer. It is. That's an excellent answer. So, what advice would you give to people, kind of like, me who started a little later in life who think it's too late to try something new?
It's never too late, I mean, so I just filed my most recent patent. It will probably be my last patent, but I just paid the bill to the patent attorneys, the last bill a couple of weeks ago. So, I'm mid-80s and I'm still working and still doing new things. So you never stop unless you want to stop. And there are people that simply bail, say, I don't want any more life. But that's not the right way to look at it. The right way to look at it is that every experience that you have, you grow from, that you get better and better. Life becomes much more interesting with every new experience.
Yes, I agree. So, where can the listeners find you?
Boy, I do have websites. You can find me by Googling Chester L. Richards or Chet Richards, although that Chet Richards will vector you into some other people. But Chester L. Richards will get you to my basic website. I also have a Twitter X site, and I have a Facebook site as well. You can find me with Chester L. Richards, and any search engine will find me. And
Okay.
there's a whole bunch of interesting material in that you'll find when you dig into it.
Thank you so much, Chester. I've enjoyed this conversation so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
That was my conversation with Chester L. Richards. And honestly, I think what stayed with me the most wasn't just the rockets, the patents, or even Star Trek. It was his definition of adventure. Adventure isn't danger. Adventure isn't youth. Adventure is doing something for the first time. And according to Chester, you never run out of first times unless you choose to. You can learn more about Chester and find his books by searching his name online, and I'll have the links waiting for you in the show notes. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow Plot Twist Radio, leave a review, and share it with someone who loves stories about real lives that feel almost unbelievable. Because sometimes the best science fiction is just history that already happened. Until next time, keep writing your story. You never know when the plot twist is coming.